Today we don't find any bodies.
Why would she say that? Because this is Mount Baldy, a mountain that doesn't kill people, but has never forgiven mistakes. One misstep, and the outcome is often already known. Located just north of Los Angeles, since 2020, there have been more than 100 search operations for missing hikers here, and at least 7 confirmed fatalities, making Baldy one of the most dangerous mountains in the United States. And it was here that the star of Gotham, Julian Sands, was found dead. After 8 separate search missions involving both air and ground teams and more than 500 volunteer search hours, officials said the operation was eventually suspended due to the high risk of avalanches. In January 2023, Julian was confirmed to have gone hiking here, and yet he vanished without a trace. Then, on June 24th, 2023, it was recreational hikers who made the discovery. First, a boot, then another boot, just a few meters away on the hillside. Then, several trekking poles, and fragments of bone. Nearby, a pile of dark-colored winter clothing. Inside a bag, they found a wallet containing a driver's license. After the discovery, the hikers contacted the Fontana Sheriff's Station to report human remains on Mount Baldy. 3 days later, the San Fernando Sheriff's Department officially confirmed the remains belonged to the missing actor. Today, we are looking back at the circumstances surrounding the tragic death of a man who dedicated his life to film, television, and the stage. Not to draw unfounded conclusions, not to judge or assign blame, but to rely on verified information so that those watching this video might avoid finding themselves in similar situations. Because, based on what we know, Julian Sands was not a novice when it came to long-distance hiking. So then, what happened? Why did he choose to go alone that day? What situations could have unfolded? And, if it were you, what would you do to prevent it? You can share your thoughts in the comments, especially those of you who are planning or preparing for a hiking trip, because this can genuinely help someone make it home safely. But before that, to begin, there's something we need to understand. Who was Julian Sands? The British-born actor was living in North Hollywood before his death. He was known for his roles in A Room with a View, Naked Lunch, and many other works. Sands, a passionate lover of nature and mountaineering, was reported missing on January 13th after he went hiking alone earlier that day in the Baldy Bowl area, part of the San Gabriel Mountains, about 80 kilometers northeast of Los Angeles. Julian had once shared that the most important item on his personal bucket list was to climb a remote peak in the Himalayas, such as Makalu. He also spoke about the closest he had ever come to death in the early 1990s, in the Andes. Trapped in a violent storm, at an elevation of more than 20,000 feet, alongside 3 other climbers. "We were all in very bad shape," he said. "Some people close to us did not survive. We were very lucky." The Gotham star also spoke about his love for the outdoors in a 2015 interview with USA Today. "I spend a great deal of time outside, climbing mountains. Ignoring that would be foolish." It is clear that his passion for the mountains ran deep. And more than that, his knowledge, his experience, and his previous encounters with death itself set Julian Sands apart from the average hiker. He was not reckless, and he was not someone who underestimated nature. So then, why did someone like him never return? That question is where every investigation ultimately stops. Because, if experience were enough, this should not have happened. And to understand that, we can't look only at the man. We have to look at the mountain I mentioned earlier, Mount Baldy. Mount Baldy is not an unfamiliar mountain to people in California. It's close to the city. It has trails. It has regular foot traffic. But that is exactly what makes it more dangerous than it appears. Because Mount Baldy doesn't kill people through isolation. It kills people through the illusion of safety. When millions of people live within a 1-hour drive of the trailhead, that familiarity can create a false sense of security. And because of that, many people step onto this mountain believing that every risk can be managed. But the numbers tell a different story. Since 2020, there have been more than 100 search operations related to missing hikers in this area, and at least 7 confirmed fatalities have been recorded. And remember this: when Julian Sands went missing, Mount Baldy was already covered in snow, with active avalanche risk. In the weeks that followed, a series of major storms moved in, burying the entire landscape under deep snow. First, the terrain. Mount Baldy is not a deserted mountain. It has trails, it has signage, it has paths that many people believe. As long as you're careful, you'll be fine. But the reality is very different. The terrain here is constantly changing. Steep slopes, loose rock, narrow sections where a single misstep leaves no opportunity to recover. One wrong move can push a hiker off the main trail. And at that point, finding the way back is no longer simple. Mount Baldy doesn't need to push anyone. It only needs to let them step beyond their margin of safety. One important thing you need to understand if you plan to take on this mountain: weather on Mount Baldy can change faster than almost any forecast. A morning may begin clear, but just hours later, strong winds, rapid drops in temperature, snow and ice begin to form on sections of trail that were already dangerous. The issue is not that hikers don't know the weather can turn bad. It's that they often believe they still have enough time to turn back before things get worse. On Mount Baldy, weather does not allow for hesitation. And sometimes, the final layer of danger is not found on a map. It exists in the mind. If you're experienced, confident, and you've survived danger before, that experience can become a double-edged sword. Hikers begin to believe they understand this mountain, that they've faced more extreme places before. And then, a small decision. Go a little farther. Don't turn back yet. Or, go alone. Mount Baldy does not punish lack of knowledge. It punishes complacency. And in Julian Sands' case, he had climbed here many times before. On the day Julian Sands went missing, weather conditions were already documented as especially dangerous. Low temperatures, strong winds, and avalanche warnings issued shortly afterward. Mount Baldy can feel stable in the morning, but within just a few hours, snow and ice can cover steep sections of terrain. For an experienced climber like Julian, the issue was not failing to recognize danger. It was the belief that he still had enough time to continue and return safely. The thought, "I understand this mountain," can push someone into a situation they can't recover from. In Julian Sands' case, there is no indication that he was careless. But when terrain changes, weather deteriorates, and human judgment underestimates risk, it only takes one factor outside of control to send everything in a direction that cannot be reversed. And that's why, before talking about lessons, we first need to understand what prevented an experienced man like Julian Sands from coming back. We need to examine each decision, not to judge, but to understand, if it were us, would we recognize our limits early enough? As you've seen how unforgiving this mountain can be. Let's now look at the search for Julian Sands. Not hard to anticipate, is it? Going back to the day after he disappeared, within the first few hours, search and rescue, SAR teams were already facing a brutal reality. The weather would not allow a search. Temperatures dropped. Winds intensified. Snow and ice covered major slopes. And most critically, avalanche warnings were issued across multiple areas of Mount Baldy. As one SAR commander was quoted indirectly by the Los Angeles Times, "We cannot put more lives at risk just to search for someone who is already missing." Ground searches were limited. Helicopters could only fly during rare, narrow windows when conditions allowed. Baldy is not a fixed mass of rock. It is a system of steep slopes, ravines, snowshoots, and bowls. Natural depressions that can pull a hiker deeper downhill without them realizing it. The hikers did not find his backpack, the item that would have likely held most of his essential equipment. And that absence raised serious questions, because most of them were experienced climbers. And sometimes, what is not found matters just as much as what is. Causes: on-screen text, wildlife activity, prolonged exposure to the elements, natural movement of terrain, repeated cycles of snowmelt and refreezing. A forensic pathologist quoted by the Los Angeles Times explained, "In an environment like Mount Baldy, finding an intact body after several months is extremely rare. As a result, recovering only partial remains is not a sign of anything unusual. It is the result of the environment." However, one detail stood out when Julian's remaining clothing was recovered. All of the clothing they found was dark-colored. No orange, no red, no yellow. Colors that make a person easier to spot from the air. "He was dressed like a ninja," said Bill Dwyer, a hiking guide. One of Sands' boots was fitted with microspikes. These are small metal spikes, about 1/4 of an inch long, that can be attached to most types of footwear. They are easy to put on, easy to remove, and very useful when traveling on snow-covered trails that are not especially steep. But on snow-covered mountains, there are often no trails at all. And Sands was moving across steep, icy terrain. In those conditions, a single misstep can turn into a catastrophic fall within seconds. In environments like that, small spikes cannot replace crampons. Crampons are longer, heavier spikes, mounted on specialized mountaineering boots, designed to bite deeply into snow and ice to prevent falls that can be fatal. "I was a little shocked when I saw those tiny spikes," Dwyer said. "They were completely unsuited for the task. What Julian used that day were micro-spikes, designed for packed snow and thin ice on established trails. By contrast, crampons are true mountaineering equipment, with long, rigid points, built to hold securely on steep, icy slopes, where even a minor slip can lead to death. Search and rescue teams have repeatedly emphasized that on icy, steep terrain, using microspikes instead of crampons can turn a small mistake into a non-survivable accident. Immediately after the report was received, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Aviation Unit was deployed. A search and rescue SAR team was lowered to the scene by helicopter. The discovery area was secured. Human remains and personal belongings were collected following forensic protocol. The identity was not released immediately. By procedure, confirmation had to rely on dental records and official forensic comparison. 3 days later, authorities confirmed that the remains belonged to Julian Richard Sands, the actor missing since January. What matters is what was not included in the official report. There was no conclusion of criminal activity, no evidence of third-party involvement. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. According to the coroner, the condition of the remains did not allow for a definitive cause to be established. The possibilities mentioned were limited to environmental exposure or natural causes, nothing beyond that. According to SAR and forensic experts quoted in US media, environmental exposure is among the most common causes of death on Mount Baldy. This term does not refer to cold alone. It includes hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion, and prolonged disorientation in an environment where returning is no longer feasible. On Mount Baldy, especially in winter, temperatures can drop rapidly within just a few hours. Strong winds accelerate heat loss. Fog can reduce visibility to near zero. Even for experienced hikers, these factors can accumulate quietly. There is no single, clear accident moment, only a gradual decline in the ability to make sound decisions. The forensic report does not rule out natural causes. That does not mean there is evidence of a specific medical condition. It reflects a reality. When internal organs and soft tissue are no longer present, evaluating underlying medical issues becomes impossible. In long-distance hiking cases, especially at elevation, factors such as physical strain, prolonged cold exposure, and isolation can trigger conditions a hiker may never have known they had. No data means no conclusion. And the investigation ends there. For the public, the discovery of remains brings informational closure. But for SAR, this was not an unusual case. Mount Baldy has seen many similar outcomes before. One person, alone, a familiar mountain, a sequence of conditions no longer within control. Julian Sands was not the first. And tragically, he was not the only one. Julian Sands is not remembered solely because he was famous. He is remembered because his case accurately reflects the risks that Mount Baldy has demonstrated time and again, and in the end, a conclusion without a definitive cause. Stop before concluding. What we know extends only to verified facts. What exactly happened can never be fully reconstructed. Not because of a lack of effort, but because the environment erased the final traces. In Julian Sands' case, authorities did not identify a specific cause of death. And that absence is not a gap. It is the boundary of investigation when confronted by nature. So, this story does not exist to answer a single question. It exists to remind us to pause before drawing conclusions. The story of Julian Sands does not end with a clear explanation. It ends with a reality that mountains consistently remind us of, that experience does not equal invulnerability. Mount Baldy is not the most dangerous mountain. But it is the mountain where people most often misjudge their level of risk. A familiar place. A hike that seemed short. A chain of decisions that appeared ordinary until there was no way back. There is no evidence that Julian Sands was reckless. No indication that he was unprepared. There is only nature and the limits that humans sometimes recognize too late. So, this story does not exist to instill fear. It exists to remind us that in the mountains, turning back at the right moment is always a victory. And sometimes, the bravest thing is not reaching the summit, but knowing when to stop so that you can make it back. Before we close, we want to take a moment to honor Julian Sands, not only as an actor who left a lasting mark on film and theater, but as a human being who lived with passion, with nature, and with journeys he truly believed in. The images you're about to see are not meant to retell a tragedy. They are a recognition of a life fully lived and remembered with respect. Julian Sands, 1958-2023. The story of Julian Sands does not end with a complete answer. It ends with the evidence nature leaves behind and the gaps humans are forced to accept. There is no evidence that he was reckless, no indication that he underestimated risk, no recorded moment that stands out as a decisive mistake. There is only a sequence of conditions unfolding quietly. Terrain shifted, weather deteriorated, and time was no longer on the human side. Mount Baldy is not the most remote mountain, not the wildest place, but its familiarity, its proximity to the city, its well-known trails, the feeling that everything is still under control is exactly what leads many to misjudge their limits. Julian Sands was experienced, a lover of nature, someone who had faced far harsher mountains before. And because of that, his case is not an exception. It is a reminder that in the mountains, experience is not the final shield. What matters is not how far you've gone or how many summits you've reached, but whether you still have the conditions to return. In search and rescue reports, there are rarely grand words, no drama, no judgment. Only short lines describing a reality that humans met their limits in an environment that does not allow second chances. And that is where the story of Julian Sands belongs. Not as a legend, not as a warning meant to frighten, but as a case that reminds us nature does not distinguish between the famous, the beginner, or the highly experienced. It only responds to decisions made moment by moment. So if there is one takeaway from this story, and if you are hiking or preparing to enter mountains as unforgiving as Mount Baldy, remember this. 1. Set a turnaround time before you set a summit goal. If you haven't reached the top by the time you've used half of your safe window, turn back. 2. Don't hike alone in winter conditions or bad weather. Going solo means there is no margin for error. 3. Assume the weather on the way down will be worse than on the way up. If the ascent feels difficult, the descent will be harder. 4. Carry navigation and tracking tools that don't rely on cell service. In the mountains, losing signal is not the exception. 5. Trust the moment when you feel you should turn back. That isn't fear. That's survival data. Because in the mountains, success is not standing on the summit. It is being able to make it home and live to tell your own story. We'll meet again in the next story, my man.